Hi everyone, and welcome to one of Accelo's best practice webinars. Today we're going to focus on understanding project plans and project schedules inside of Accelo. I'm your host, Molly Flynn, a product manager at Accelo, and someone who's really passionate about making sure that our customers can take full advantage of all of the automated, powerful scheduling that Accelo's project module offers. And today, I hope to make you feel more confident about taking advantage of that scheduling power by talking about what a project plan is, what a project schedule is, what are the key differences between the two. And in order to do that, we're going to dive into Accelo's 3 project schedule types and talk about how those types influence the way that project schedules are created and adjusted. Because you know what? If project milestones and tasks aren't scheduled appropriately on assignees' calendars, then that work is likely to not get done on time. All right, so let's dive in. Project plans. Project plans are the core of Accelo's project management framework. Every project needs a project plan. And without that plan, acting as the blueprint for scheduling project work inside of Accelo, Accelo wouldn't be able to offer the automated scheduling that it does. Project schedules. Accelo offers 3 types of project schedules, and those are set and configured on a project-by-project basis. We have adaptive schedules, fixed deadline schedules, fixed schedules. The project schedule type and other project date settings act like the rules that determine how scheduled dates on tasks and milestones are calculated and adjusted by Accelo. So I'm just going to repeat that once more. The type of project schedule that's set on any given project, in addition to the project date settings, those are the rules that determine how Accelo calculates and adjusts scheduled start and scheduled due dates on all milestones and tasks within a project. And that's significant because the scheduled start and due dates reflect the current schedule of a project, and they indicate when tasks and milestones should be able to start and should be able to be completed. All right, now that we know what the plan is and what a project schedule is, let's dive into understanding how those schedules are built and created. The first type of project schedule that we're going to dive into is the fixed schedule. And we're going to dive into the fixed schedule initially because the fixed schedule is the most simple yet the most rigid type of Accelo project schedule. And therefore, it's the easiest to understand how the schedule is actually built. Fixed schedules. Basically, they just take the plan that the project manager creates inside of that Gantt chart screen and they fix those dates in place. They lock them in place. So if a task has a start date of April 1st and a due date of April 3rd in the plan, then that task will always have a scheduled start and due date that's equal to the dates set in the plan. And what that means is that the project schedule is always a direct reflection of the project plan, because the plan dates and the scheduled dates will always be equal to one another. The fixed schedule type was really built to align with pretty traditional project management frameworks like waterfall, for example, where, the first phase of a project has to be started and completed before the second phase of a project can even begin. Every phase, every sequential phase of a project is dependent on the prior one being completed. Our implementation team here at Accelo typically recommends that new customers use the fixed schedule type because it's the easiest to manage. When you're trying to get your feet wet inside of Accelo and there is so much optionality available to you inside of projects, we want to make sure that you can start to get familiar with the way that Accelo creates project schedules. And because this is the simplest it's a good place to start. Within fixed schedules, Accelo won't adjust any dates or create any dates. We actually don't even let assignees set their own estimated dates with fixed schedules. And so for project managers who are really just looking to make sure that their work gets done on time and assignees are doing their tasks on time, this is usually the recommendation that we go with. All right, the next type of schedule that we want to discuss is the adaptive schedule type. However, we can't really dive into the adaptive schedule type until you're familiar with dependencies and auto start. Dependencies are a component of every project inside of Accelo. And auto start is a feature that is available on every project inside of Accelo. So let's dive into what dependencies and auto start both are and what their impact is. Dependencies are like rules. They define required conditions that allow for the auto start feature to trigger automatic status progressions on milestones and tasks. And there are two types of dependencies that exist inside of Accelo. The first type of dependency that we're going to talk about is a built-in dependency. And these dependencies exist between parent and child objects on projects. For example, the project itself is the parent of its milestones, and a milestone is the parent of all of the tasks underneath it. And these types of dependencies, they only require that the parent object has been started or has been activated so that auto start can trigger an automatic progression on the child object. So if the project has started and auto start is turned on, then the milestone can automatically progress into an activated status. The second type of dependency is a user-created dependency. And these are manually built inside of the plan between up and downstream milestones or tasks. And this type of dependency requires that upstream tasks or milestones actually be completed before downstream milestones or tasks can be automatically progressed by the auto start feature. So just because something has been activated or started doesn't mean that auto start can trigger an automatic progression if it's a user created dependency. Okay, so let's dive into auto start. Even though I've introduced it slightly, I want to make sure that we reveal all of the details about auto start and how it functions. So as I've mentioned, auto start is a feature that automatically progresses milestones and tasks into active or started statuses when their dependencies have been satisfied. For example, task B here in green can automatically be progressed into a started status when task A is completed if there's a user-created dependency between those two tasks. Now, there's actually a few different ways that you can configure auto start to work on your projects. The first option that you have for auto start configuration is to turn it off. This is actually only available on adaptive and fixed deadline schedules because on fixed schedules, auto start is a built-in feature. But when it's turned off, Accelo will never automatically progress a task or a milestone into an active status. The sole responsibility is left on the project manager and the task assignees to make sure that they are progressing their tasks on the planned start date, which will then make sure that Accelo is predicting that the project will be started and finished on the planned dates. The second option for auto start configuration is labeled when dependencies are satisfied. And this configuration option means that tasks and milestones can start much earlier or much later than their planned start dates. And that's because when we were talking about those upstream dependencies, those user-created dependencies, if those upstream dependencies are starting and finishing much earlier than their planned dates, Accelo is going to automatically start downstream items like tasks and milestones much earlier than their planned dates. And then the third configuration option for auto start is that auto start will actually only be triggered when dependencies are satisfied and the planned start date of the task and milestones have been reached. And what this means is that auto start can never be triggered earlier than or before a task or milestone's planned start date, but it will always be triggered on or after the planned start date. And this is usually our best practice recommendation to customers because it maintains fidelity between the plan and the actual dates. And those actual dates impact how the project schedule is progressing. So, to recap, AutoStart is a feature that will automatically progress tasks and milestones when dependencies are satisfied or when dependencies are satisfied and the planned start date has been reached. And there's two different types of dependencies. Some of them have to be completed and some of them have to have their parents activated. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of how dependencies and AutoStart interact with each other to move and shift the scheduled dates on a project, we can really see this in action with adaptive schedules. The adaptive schedule type is the most flexible and responsive to progress or delays over the course of a project. It's also highly configurable. And that configuration happens with the project date settings. There's several project date settings that project managers have the freedom, but also, the ownership of making decisions about how scheduled dates will be calculated and adjusted in order to create an adaptive schedule of their project. Let's talk about a few of those date settings that project managers have to configure on adaptive schedules. The first one that I'm going to review, which will be seen in a video shortly, is the setting for user estimated dates. User estimated dates, when enabled, allow assignees to actually set their own scheduled start and due dates by creating what we call user estimated dates. And once those are created, assignees are actually setting their own scheduled dates. The second category of project date settings that I'll refer to is the predicted dates category. And of particular importance here is that the predicted start dates on this project that we're going to watch the video of can actually be predicted and set earlier than the planned dates when those upstream and parent dependencies are moving along faster or more quickly than their planned dates. So let's say, the project starts 10 days earlier than it was planned to start. Well, then Accelo will predict that all of the tasks and milestones on that project are likely to be scheduled to start 10 days earlier than their own planned dates. And then auto start is the third category of project date settings that I wanted to review. And on this particular project, we have auto start set to ignore the planned start date. So it's only going to look at whether tasks and milestones dependencies have been satisfied, irregardless of the planned date on that task or milestone. We also have it set to occur instantaneously. So we're not going to wait until the next business day to automatically progress a task. We're going to do that immediately, as soon as its dependency has been satisfied. All right, so let's explore how an adaptive schedule is built, how Accelo uses predicted date settings and auto start and user estimated dates in order to build an adaptive schedule version of a project plan. Here you'll see a pretty simple overview of a project. It's got 3 milestones and some tasks. Right now, the project is planned to start on April 21st and end on May 8th. And you can see that in the planned dates dropdown. You can also see that because today is April 11th, it's being predicted to start on time and actually end a day before its planned due date. Now, once I activate this project, auto start is going to kick in. And as you can see, milestone 1 and milestone 2 were automatically activated just because the project was activated. Those parent-child dependencies, those built-in dependencies were at play here. And that shifts the scheduled dates of those 2 milestones to be today, 10 days earlier than when the project was planned to start. Now, task C here, I'm going to add some user estimated dates in order to illustrate how Accelo will take those user estimated dates and use them as the actual scheduled dates on the task itself. So once I select a user estimated start and due date, those dates actually get set as the scheduled dates for that particular task. So when I hover over task C, you can see that April 21st and April 23rd are the user estimated dates, which are actually way earlier than the planned dates. Now let's see auto start in action again. I'm going to activate and complete task A for the purposes of discussion. And once that happens, you'll see that task B is automatically progressed into a started status because it had a user created dependency on task A. And once task A completed, AutoStart knew that it could automatically progress task B into a started status. Remember, we're not paying attention to the plan dates here. Now, you might be asking, why did milestone 3 not start? Well, that's a little tricky. But when I hover over the dates of milestone 3, you'll see that it actually has a fixed start. And yep, any milestone and any task inside of an adaptive scheduled project can have fixed dates set. And what that means is that milestone 3 is never going to start until the fixed start date of May 5th. All right, so now we just saw how an adaptive schedule type and certain project date settings shift and adjust the scheduled dates on a project. But we only really talked about what happens when, the project starts earlier than it was planned to start. What happens when it potentially starts 4 days after its planned start date? Well, the same predictive automation will happen. So for example, if the project had actually started 4 days after its planned start date, that has trickle-down effects for all milestones and tasks on the project. And Accelo will predict that because the project started late, that all of its milestones and tasks are potentially going to start late. And those predicted dates are going to be used to set and create and adjust the scheduled start and due dates for those objects. So for example, you can see here that task C was actually planned to start on April 15th and planned to be due on April 17th. However, because the project started late, we're now predicting that that task can't actually start until the 20th and likely won't finish until the 21st. So just as Accelo will allow for adaptive schedules to be brought forward in time when things are running smoothly and milestones and tasks are progressing quickly, the same thing, the same logic is applied when the project is running behind the planned duration or behind schedule. And what we do there is that we predict based on the gap between the actual start and the planned start, we predict when milestones and tasks might be able to start. And that is what sets their scheduled dates. So just to recap, the adaptive schedule type is the most flexible and responsive to changes in the environment. It often allows for a high degree of collaboration between your team and your client. It tends to align pretty well with principles of the agile methodology, where flexibility and quality are more important than strict deadlines. If a project and its milestones and tasks are progressing faster than was planned, then Accelo will predict and adjust the scheduled dates of other tasks and milestones to be reflective of that fast pace. But if a project is, delayed and starting late and finishing later than planned, then other downstream tasks and milestones will be predicted to be starting late and potentially finishing later than the planned due dates. And as long as that works for a particular project or a particular client, this is really the type of project that Accelo tries to encourage our customers to utilize. There's a high degree of configuration. You allow assignees to take ownership over when their tasks should be scheduled. And the adaptive schedule type reacts to reality versus sticking to a plan that might not be very realistic at any given moment. Now, sometimes being able to deliver services to your client on time is really important. Sometimes we have projects that are centered around, say, delivering a new marketing campaign to a client. And our client is interested in this marketing campaign because they have a new business initiative to drive an additional source of revenue because they're releasing some new product features. So your teams, are likely to be numerous and autonomous and self-organizing, and they're working on a wide variety of things: blog posts, landing page, Google Ads. And the work that these teams are doing is not explicitly dependent on one another, but they all need to be completed on time so that your client can launch their new campaign and meet revenue goals by a particular timeline. So that's where fixed deadline schedules come into play. Fixed deadline schedules are a marriage between fixed schedules and adaptive schedules. When this type of schedule is applied to a project, Accelo will fix or lock in the planned due date as set in the Gantt chart. And that date will always be used as the scheduled due date. So the due date that appears on tasks and users' calendars. But the scheduled start dates will be adjusted and adapt similarly to the way that Accelo adapts and predicts dates on adaptive schedules. So this means that there's a little bit of flexibility with the start dates of work, but assignees are well aware that the deadlines are fixed, and they're fixed for important reasons. We have to be able to deliver quality services and materials on time to this client on this date. If you're looking for a high level of fidelity in order to deliver work on time, but you want assignees to have some authority to set their own scheduled dates, and you're okay if work starts a little bit later, then the fixed deadline schedule is really likely your best bet. It's a great balance between adapting to reality and being accountable to delivering your services under contract on time to your client and maintaining a really positive relationship. All right, so let's review what we discussed today. A really important concept to understand is that the schedule type as set in project settings, plus other date settings options, those two things combined create the mechanism for Accelo to adjust, set, and predict scheduled dates for milestones and tasks. And those scheduled dates are a direct reflection of the project's schedule at any given time. And that's important because you can plan for a lot of things, and you can have timelines and deadlines for when you want to be finished with particular phases of work in a project. But we all know that the world changes very quickly and clients can have additional requests, or one of your team members might be out sick and you're going to have to find someone to replace them, and that might set you back by a day. And so being able to select the schedule type and the date settings that apply to your project to make sure that it's being managed and it's being scheduled in the best way for your team and for your client is really an important part of Accelo's project management framework. Giving users, giving project managers the freedom and the autonomy to make decisions about how a project is automatically managed and automatically scheduled. The other thing to recap is that there are 3 types of schedules inside of Accelo. Adaptive schedules take planned dates and predict when tasks and milestones should be scheduled based on progress or delays to other tasks and milestones that are dependent on one another. Fixed schedules always set scheduled start and due dates to be equal to the planned dates because those planned dates are locked in. And fixed deadline schedules are a marriage between the first 2 types of schedules, where scheduled start dates are predicted and adjusted, but planned due dates are fixed and therefore always used as the scheduled due dates.
Thank you all for coming. As I mentioned at the beginning, in case you missed it, I will answer a few questions now, and then we have a record of all the questions that have been submitted, so we will follow up with those that might need more significant answers or conversations discussed with you and our team. I'll start off with a question from Trisha. Trisha asked, can you change the type of project plan to an adaptive schedule after it's already been started? And the answer to that question is yes. You have the freedom to change the type of schedule setting that you applied to your project after the project has started. And that goes for any types of project plans. So say you created a project and it was adaptive and you needed to change it to be fixed, then Accelo will retroactively make the changes necessary to that project and to the dates of that project to ensure that that project schedule now operates on a fixed basis. The same goes, in the opposite direction. Another question that I'll answer is, with fixed schedules, can we adjust dates and then any future dates be adjusted? And this question comes from John Wilkinson. So basically, what John was asking is, if a client if a client needs longer, or takes longer to get back to you, or something is delaying the project out significantly into the future, but the dates are fixed right now, can you adjust those? And the answer to that question is also yes, you can do that. The project manager or any individual who has access to the project plan, that Gantt chart screen, they can adjust fixed dates out into the future or even into the past. The one thing that I want to note is John was asking, or what I thought John was asking was, if I change the dates on a fixed task in the Gantt chart, will that also automatically change dates for everything else below it on the project plan? And that answer is, well, sometimes, depending on the dependencies that you have set up and the dates of all of the other, downstream tasks and milestones, some of them will change. If they're linked to the task that you change the dates on, they will automatically change. But sometimes you will need to manually adjust other dates if they're sort of standalone. They don't have a dependency related to the date that you shifted. Now, if you change the dates of the overall project, which is really basically just the start date of the first task or milestone and the planned due date on the last task or milestone. So if you change that entire duration, then yes, all of the dates will automatically shift on that fixed schedule. Another question that was posed, what happens if I have a fixed schedule and I don't start or finish my task on time? Well, actually, that doesn't apply to fixed schedules. So when you have a fixed schedule, your tasks always have fixed, their planned starts are always fixed. They're locked in place, and they'll always auto start on time. And what we mean by on time here is they will always auto start on their planned dates, because those planned dates are fixed. And while time, the budgeted time on that task, for example, may roll over onto the assignee's schedule if they have not completed it on time, just because that task doesn't get completed on time, there's no ripple effects downstream on other tasks on a fixed schedule. So if things aren't finishing on time on a fixed schedule, the other things on the project, tasks and milestones, they'll still also always auto start on their planned start date, because that's fixed. Let's see here. Julie has a great question, and this is one that I get a lot, that our team gets a lot. It's definitely an example of an area that's hard to figure out what exactly Accelo is calculating and changing. So Julie asks, I've noticed that when I change dates in the schedule, I also have to then change the task dates. If the dates change in the schedule, will the dates flow up to the tasks? Now, Julie, I will likely follow up with you just to make sure that I'm addressing this correctly, and that we're using that you and I are thinking about the same thing when we're saying schedule. But if it depends on the type of schedule that the project has. So let's say you have an adaptive project and you have user estimated dates enabled. What that means is that when you go to a task modal, for example, from the overview on the project overview screen, when you open up a task modal, yes, on an adaptive project, with user estimated dates turned on that task modal, you can edit dates right there and then. But those dates are only the user estimated dates, and that will not change the planned dates on the task. The only way to change the planned dates on the task is to change them on that Gantt chart screen. So, so for example, on a fixed schedule project, you actually cannot create those user estimated dates on the task modal. There's no editing there. There's no creating of dates. So it definitely differs. And if you change dates in the plan on that Gantt chart screen, no matter what type of schedule your project has, those plan dates will change, and they potentially have an impact on other dates, on the scheduled dates, for example. But if you are changing dates on a task modal, those dates will only be creating those user estimated dates. And those user estimated dates only influence the scheduled dates on the task when those tasks appear on users' schedules. So just sort of wrapping that one up, plan dates must be edited in the plan, and then other dates can be created, like user estimated dates, outside of the plan on, say, for example, the task modal. But those dates don't apply to the plan. They have no impact on the plan dates. Another question sort of related to these user estimated dates is, if an assignee edits a date on a task, how does this affect the scheduled date? Does the scheduled date, follow the plan date? Does it follow the assignee's created date? or something in between? The answer to that question I just referenced, but the only dates that, you know, an assignee can ever edit or create are those user estimated dates. And the project manager has to allow for the assignee to have that ability. And when those user estimated dates are created, those are going to set the scheduled date. And those scheduled dates will be used to put tasks on users' schedules. So on the scheduled dashboard, on the, say, weekly timesheet, for example, because you have already said as the project manager that the assignee should be able to estimate and schedule their own tasks. And so we want to give them the power to do that. And the only, you know, caveat to that is as soon as the task is actually progressed into a started status and actually progressed into a completed status, then obviously we're going to set those actual dates as the dates that the work actually started and completed. All right, so I'm going to answer one last question here. Let's see. Just real quickly, yes, we are going to send over the recording of this webinar to all of the participants, and you should be able to share the webinar with any of your team members as well. So Zachary has a couple questions here. I'll try to address one or two of them before we wrap up. Let's see. Is adaptive schedule necessary in order to have dependent tasks automatically start? So adaptive scheduling is not necessary to have dependent tasks automatically start, Zachary. What is necessary to have dependent tasks automatically start, is turning that auto start feature on. So that auto start feature I discussed, there's 3 settings. You can turn it off and then nothing will auto start, whether tasks are dependent on one another or not. And then the other 2 settings which enable auto start, they will automatically start dependent tasks just under different criteria. So those required conditions that I referred to, those will come into play. So adaptive scheduling is not necessary. You can have auto start turned on fixed deadline schedules, and then on fixed schedules, auto start is by default on and you cannot turn it off. So the schedule type isn't the only variable that plays into tasks automatically starting, and the most important setting to turn on is that auto start setting. So let's just see. Yeah, so Zachary, we'll definitely follow up on your secondary question in an email to you. All right, I think that, yeah, I think that I have addressed most of the questions. There's a few here. Even Colin said, you know, feel free to follow up on it later. There's a few here that require a bit more discussion and a bit more explanation. And I and myself and Drew, my colleague, will be happy to get back to you over the course of the next week. And you know, five business days. And then yes, we, just as a reminder, we will be sending out the recording to everyone who attended today. Thank you all for coming. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.